His dark materials. Sorry. His dark materials. Look at them. Look at them. His dark materials. Hello, my name is Ben, and recently I reread His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. His Dark Materials is a trilogy of 3 books. They are fantasy adventure, and yes, I reread them recently. And when was the last time I read them? Well, I fear that the last time I reread all 3, kind of as a series, was, I think, 20 years ago. And why did I want to read them again now? Well, it was a very kind of impulse thingy-majig. I was a bit of an idiot earlier this month. I was at the gym and I injured myself because I am an idiot, and I wasn't bedbound, but I had to kind of get better, and rest. And these have always been a staple of my shelves, and they were just calling out to me, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna reread His Dark Materials. So yes, if you don't know what these are, then basically. This is a trilogy, a fantasy trilogy about, well, it centres on Lyra and Will, who are 2 12-year-olds, and it is about their involvement in an interdimensional war against God. Well, not against God, but against religious authority and religious powers and stuff like that. So yes, Philip Pullman, he does not like organised religion. It's a big deal of it is about critiquing religious powers and religious kind of hierarchical structures, organised religion basically, which has made the trilogy fairly controversial, but we'll get into that later on. The trilogy is called His Dark Materials, and it comes from Paradise Lost. Into this wild abyss, the womb of nature, and perhaps her grave, of neither sea, nor shore, nor air, nor fire, but all these in their pregnant causes mixed confusedly, and which thus must ever fight, unless the Almighty Maker them ordain His dark materials to create more worlds. Into this wild abyss the wary fiend stood on the brink of hell, and looked awhile, pondering his voyage. So yes, and his Paradise Lost? No. His Dark Materials is kind of not a retelling, but a reworking, rejigging, deconstructed chocolate gâteau of Paradise Lost. It's sort of like Paradise Lost 2: The Revenge sort of thing. And to be more amorphous about it, basically what this trilogy of books is about, it's about growing up, essentially. Right, so it has been 20 years since I read all of them. It's really weird with this because I have. Only read them once, all the way through. The first book, Northern Lights or The Golden Compass, I think I've read this about 3 times. Subtle Knife, second book, I think I've read 2 times, or it might have been 1.5. I'm not sure. But the Amber Spyglass, the last book, I've only read once. So yeah, I've only read all the way through. I've only read them once, and that was 20 years ago. And now here we are. So yes, we start with the first book, Northern Lights, or The Golden Compass, as it is in America. And from what I understand, I think this is like a fan favourite. And do I agree with that? Well, I think, we'll get to that. So what is this? So this is essentially a rescue mission story. We have Lyra who has grown up in Oxford, and her friend Roger, as well as a bunch of other children, have gone missing, have been kidnapped. And Lyra kind of goes on this big rescue mission to find Roger and rescue the other children and find out what's been happening to them. As well as that, there's kind of other things kind of going on in the background, sort of sinister things going on in the background involving the church, which her uncle, Lord Asriel, is doing something weird with. But this is a fantasy series, and this isn't our Oxford, or this isn't our world. This is a fantasy world in which everyone it's kind of similar to our world, but there's bits which are much different. And the main difference is that everyone has an animal counterpart called a demon. And this animal counterpart, it kind of has to stick quite close to you. It can't kind of go off anywhere else. It has to stick quite close to you. But when you're a child, it takes the form of different animals depending on your mood. once you become an adult, it kind of settles into one animal. And it's kind of, for the most part, it's kind of on the nose what animal it kind of settles on, depending on what you kind of do and kind of what your disposition is. So for example, if you're a librarian, your demon will be an owl or a raven or something like that. If you're a soldier, it will be a wolf. You know, it's for the most part, it's kind of fairly on the nose. So yes, children start to go missing, and it becomes fairly obvious that it might have something to do with Mrs. Coulter, who is this really, well, she's very beautiful, and she has a golden monkey demon who is like one of the most nasty things you can read about. But yeah, she's this very sort of alluring, intelligent woman, but underneath she's really, really nasty, and she's kind of one of the people involved in kidnapping these children. And so Lyra kind of finds that out, and so she sort of has to go on this big mission into the north, into Lapland and into Svalbard and the Arctic, and try and rescue Roger and these other kids, and sort of work out what's been happening with them and what sinister, nasty things Mrs. Coulter is doing to these kids and their demons. So yes, so this is a fantastic, if very bizarre, very strange, weird, but excellent adventure story. Rescue mission story, and reading it again, I was just like, oh yes, I remember really enjoying this. I mean, Philip Pullman, it's an interesting thing that he did, because it is a weird kind of alternative world, but it doesn't take that long to kind of realise what's different about it and what's similar about it to our world, and yeah, excellent kind of world building. The armoured bears are fabulous. I think that's what a lot of people love about the book, is the armoured bears of Svalbard. Eirik, is that his name? Eirik. Eirik Byronson. Yeah, it's just got fantastic characters and really sort of exciting bits, and it is dark. Yeah, it is a dark story. Is it a standalone? Because this is the sort of the fan favourite. Is it a standalone? Well, sort of. I'm not going to spoil anything, but it ends on a cliffhanger. And I guess I've heard someone say that if this was a standalone, and there was like a couple of tweaks, here and there towards the end, then it would have been like an amazing kind of like. But yeah, it would have been like really fascinating, kind of open-ended, very bleak ending. If you read this as a standalone, it is a bleak ending, but it is kind of like a cliffhanger, literal cliffhanger ending. Yeah, and Lyra is an amazing protagonist. Yeah, she's just really, really awesome. So yes, it's just very, very well done. It's very dark. It's very, because that's the other thing. Because I've said like, oh, it's about it's about the war against religion and stuff, and you might think, well, I thought these were books for kids. And no, they are not for kids. Well, at least they're not for 8-year-olds. Well, at least, I mean, I don't know, an 8-year-old might be able to read this. I don't know what 8-year-olds read nowadays. They might be reading Cujo or something, I don't know. But at least it's marketed sort of like as a YA type thing. Or at least I think that's where you find it, isn't it, usually, in YA sections of books. And yes, it is. I mean, they say it's suitable for 11 plus, but it's not written for 11 plus, if that makes sense. Yeah, these are books that can be enjoyed by 11 to adulthood. So yes, a very, very good start. So then 2 years later, the sequel, The Subtle Knife, was released. And in this book, it's a little bit shorter. This book, we are introduced to Will, and Will comes from our world, our dimension universe. So he lives with his mother, who is suffering from some kind of deteriorating mental illness. His father, years and years previous, went missing on an expedition in the Arctic. He went missing, was never heard of again. And at the beginning of the book, there are some shady men who keep kind of coming to the house, trying to sort of find something that belonged to his father. And at the beginning of the book, Will inadvertently kills one of these men during a break-in in self-defense, but he ends up killing him, and so Will has to go on the run. And whilst he is on the run, he stumbles across a window, a portal into another world, into another dimension, and so he goes through it. There he meets Lyra, who at the end of this book kind of went into this other world as well, and yes, things kind of go on from there. So the subtle knife is this knife which can cut basically through anything. It can cut through dimensions, and it can cut through the heaviest sort of metal, and it can also cut through sort of divine beings as well. And only one person can wield it, and that ends up being Will. So yes, this is it's an interesting follow-up. It's interesting kind of reading, because I've been interested in what other people think, and some people like really prefer this to Northern Lights. So in Northern Lights, you get a very, very interesting sense of place with Northern Lights, because you go to the Arctic and it's armored bears, and it's just, and these nasty cliff ghast things, and yeah, it's just very, very sort of specific and kind of otherworldly, This one, the main kind of other dimension world, is this city, which is, I think it's called Cittagaze? Yeah, it's this city which kind of has a kind of Costa del Sol Mediterranean vibe to it. And there's kind of like espresso machines there and refrigerators. The only thing is that all the adults have fled this city, and so it's kind of overrun by kind of these feral children. But the reason that the adults have fled is because of these nasty spectres, which and the spectres are these kind of vampiric ghosts which kind of feed off your soul, feed off your consciousness. But only when you're an adult. Again, it's this thing about what happens when you change from a child to an adult. Themes. Oh, it's starting to rain. So yeah, one thing about Northern Lights is that it is a focused story. It's a kind of, even though it's kind of very complex world and magic system, it's a simple story, focused story. And this is kind of a little bit less focused, just because we're going through there's like 3 different worlds we're sort of going through against. I'm sorry if you can hear that rain. Ooh. However, Philip Pullman, he does kind of weave. He is very good at sort of setting up and paying off stuff, and kind of introducing certain things which you don't think are too important, but then later on are like very, very important. So, for instance, at the beginning of this book, a character is mentioned, and you sort of don't really think anything of it until this book, where he becomes very, very pivotal. So I did really enjoy this. And another thing that Philip Pullman is very good at is cliffhangers. And this book has this book has a great cliffhanger. This book has a really, really amazing cliffhanger as well. Yes, also it's a little bit darker, as I said. We do have kind of torture in this, and nasty stuff happening. Mrs. Coulter kind of ramps up her nastiness. So my only kind of main criticism about this is that is Lyra herself. She makes a couple of mistakes that jeopardizes Will's safety, basically, and she becomes very, very remorseful and apologetic. And out of that kind of remorse, it kind of, she sort of loses a bit of her moxie. She loses a bit of her agency, a little bit, that she had in the first book. And so for a long time, and from the rest of this book and sort of into the last book, she kind of has this she sort of loses her agency a bit, and she sort of says, I won't use the alethiometer unless you tell me to, Will, and she doesn't like become subservient to Will or anything, but she just kind of she just sort of, her spirit and her tenacity and everything is sort of dampened a bit, which I was like, and you could argue that's a good thing. I mean, that's kind of fleshing out her character and making it kind of more 3-dimensional. But yeah, there was a bit where I was just like, I kind of want you to be more in control, Lyra, because Will becomes a little bit more in control. And I guess because, we're only introduced to Will at the beginning of this book, I was kind of missing Lyra kind of being the one who was, you know, charging all these kids about. But yes, but other than that, I mean, it's still a really, really like gripping, weird book. And yes, as I say, it has a great cliffhanger. Yes, cliffhanger. So yes, so that's The Subtle Knife. Also, we're introduced to Dr. Mary Malone, who comes from our world, who I sort of completely forgot to mention. So one of the big things which is surrounding what Mrs. Coulter and Lord Asriel, Lyra's uncle, and indeed the church, or the magisterium, they're all interested in this thing called dust. Dust. Anyone? And dust is kind of a thing that the church, or the magisterium in Lyra's world, is very keen to get rid of, or to kind of like control, because it kind of goes against their... If people found out about it, it kind of like undermines their whole kind of belief system. And if you undermine their belief system, then it undermines their power. So yes. So that's kind of like that's a massive thing about the books, which I forgot to mention. And then people would have to wait 3 years for the last book, which is The Amber Spyglass. So it is the longest of the three. It is about 550 pages. And it's in this book that we have the big war battle, interdimensional war battle between kind of religious authorities and religious deities and everyone else, and Lord Asriel's army, which he has been amassing since the end of the first book. It's a lot, this book. It is a lot. It's kind of the most sort of action-packed. It's the most it's got tons of characters in it. In terms of focus, it is all over the place, but it's like, yeah. And the ending, I mean, the ending, we'll get to the ending, but it's very, very good. So I will say with The Amber Spyglass, there does seem to be a drop off in writing quality. And I don't really know why that would be, because it's... I mean, if you think about Northern Lights, I mean, this book is, like, the writing in it is fabulous and really clear, and the characters are really distinct. I guess because the story itself is more simple. Yeah, it's just written very, very well. And this is, I mean, it's Philip Pullman, so it's still written very well, but it's just characters' speech is less distinct, and things are kind of rushed. I mean, it's a big, long, chunky book, and lots of stuff is happening. But to get to kind of point A to B, sometimes things are kind of sort of rushed through, and yeah, I just sort of noticed that distinctly in this book. However, having said that, it is still very, very enjoyable, and yeah, if you're an 11-year-old, you're not going to care about, well, you might do, but you're probably not going to care about the writing quality dropping off. I'm just a bit of a petty snob. But yes, and in this book, there's some weird, very weird stuff that happens in this book. I mean, Mary Malone, she becomes more of a sort of third protagonist, and she ends up in this other dimension world where there are these these creatures called the Mulefa. Is that what it is? Now, I remember when I read this 20 years ago. This was before the days of Google image search and stuff like that. And I remember sort of not really having a clue what these creatures look like, because they're described as having a diamond kind of spine. So they have one leg at the front, one leg at the back, and two at the sides. These two legs at the sides, they can kind of hook onto these wheels. So they go around on these wheels. As well as that, they kind of have an antelope's body, but with a long neck. They have a long trunk, and they have horns. And I remember sort of reading that when I was like 14 or whatever, and thinking, what? Nowadays we do have Google image search, and we have fan art, and so I was able to kind of go, oh yeah, has anyone kind of attempted to draw what these creatures look like? And sure enough, they have, and it kind of makes a lot more sense. But yes, so they play a big part in the story, and Dr. Malone plays a big part in the story, in terms of her involvement with Lyra and Will. And yeah, in this book we see the connection between Lyra and Will sort of deepen and yes, the massive battle and stuff. Also, a really good thing I thought about this book, it has one of the most terrifying, kind of horrifying concepts I've read in a while, which is this thing called the abyss. It's this never-ending pit, and if you fall into it, it's never-ending. So you're going to fall forever and ever and ever. So eventually you'll die from starvation or dehydration or whatever as you're falling down. But it doesn't stop there, because then your ghost carries on falling down and down and down. And I was like, that's a horrifying concept. And without spoiling anything, characters do end up going into this abyss. And there's bits, Lyra and Will go to the land of the dead and stuff, and we see this battle against the authority, God, but the authority. Now the ending, I'm not going to give away what the ending is, but I will just say what the tone of the ending is, which is really, really moving, I guess. Yeah, I mean, people have said that they've been in tears when reading the end of the book. And it is like really, really well done and crafted, and I was just like, "Ooh, Philip Pullman, yes, you did it." Because at the end of the book, we get kind of the point and the message of what the whole trilogy is about, which is this thing about the transition from childhood to adulthood, and the quest for wisdom, and learning things is not a bad thing. And I think that's kind of with Philip Pullman. I mean, Philip Pullman is an atheist, and he has a big kind of issue with kind of dogma and people telling you what to think and all the rest of it. And so his whole thing is like, well, no, you can, if you find out for yourself, knowledge is good, and finding out about the world is good. So that was another thing. I was reading an interview with him, and he was explaining this thing about transitioning from childhood to adulthood, and the interviewer was saying, oh yes, so it's kind of like St. Paul when he says, when I became a man, I put away childish things. And Philip Pullman was like, no, you don't put them away, you carry them with you. You bring everything that you've learnt with you into adulthood. I thought, well, that was good. There is a bit of a paradox in that belief with Philip Pullman, because at the end of this book, the characters, they do lose something. I guess is it innocence? I don't know, but they do have to. I don't want to spoil anything. There is a loss, basically. Is it innocence or is it something else? Paradox. These are controversial in the sense that, they do kind of critique religious power and authority, and it kind of Philip Pullman, he sort of makes up his own, through a fantasy lens, he makes up sort of where God comes from, and who God is. And it's interesting, the kind of the Paradise Lost references. I mean, in the second book, angels start to appear, and I'd forgotten that angels appeared. And in the third book, I mean, like proper angels, like Metatron and stuff appear in it. And I'd completely forgotten about that, and I was like, oh, right, all right. Also, in the Amber Spyglass, I was pleasantly surprised. There are 2 buff gay angels, like legitimate gay in love angels in this, and I was like, all right, yeah. Yes, so I was pleasantly surprised by that. So some people say that the way he puts his point across is quite preachy, and I mean, I wouldn't say that it's preachy. It's not subtle. It's not subtle that he doesn't like hierarchical sort of religious powers, basically. Taken as what kind of they sort of are, which is a fantasy adventure, they are very, very enjoyable. I would say that they kind of decrease in sort of writing quality as the books kind of go down. But I mean, I'm not saying that the second 2 books are rubbish. They're not. They're still very, very good. And the story is well done. And it's just, the way that he kind of, as I said before, like sort of plant stuff which you think is not going to be a big deal, and then later on becomes a big, big deal. It's just very, very well done. So, yes, Lyra and Will. I'm a bit worried about watching the HBO BBC drama. Why have I done that? I think maybe I'll have a break and then get back to it. But yes, no, definitely. If you have not read them for a while, like I hadn't, something 20 years, then definitely go back to them because I think they are definitely worth it. So yeah, I think the critiques he makes about religion, I think those points that he makes are transcended by these kind of more broader points, which is to tell stories, love life, and be nice to each other, essentially. So yes, why don't we do that, hey?